Every day, thousands of containers move through ports. Trucks haul them across highways. Trains carry them over borders. The system runs so smoothly, most people don't even think about it. But not long ago, moving goods across the ocean was a different story. Every shipment, crates, barrels, sacks, had to be handled one by one. Loading a single ship could take days, sometimes weeks. It was not just slow, it was expensive. In some cases, the cost of simply putting something on a ship was higher than the cost of making the product in the first place. Cargo often got damaged or went missing. And because nothing was standardized, ships wasted space trying to pack everything in. Ports were chaotic. With no consistent packaging, crews had to reorganize cargo constantly. There were no tracking systems, just paper logs and a lot of guesswork. It was inefficient, and everyone in the industry knew it. The system worked, but only just. It was clear that something had to change. The only question was how. What followed was not just a change in shipping, it reshaped how goods move across the world. It cut the cost of shipping by more than 90%. It slashed loading times from days to hours, and it sparked a global trade revolution that transformed cities, created new economies, and connected billions of people like never before. So how did this simple box become one of the most important inventions in modern history? And what had to change for it to work? Let's look at what shipping looked like before it, and why it couldn't stay that way. In the 1950s, shipping cargo meant packing everything by hand. There were no standard sizes. A single shipment could include barrels, wooden crates, sacks, and oddly shaped equipment, each needing to be moved one by one. Ships would sit in port for days and weeks as teams of workers loaded and unloaded them piece by piece. Labor costs were high. Mistakes were common. And it was not unusual for cargo to arrive damaged, or not at all. This kind of shipping limited trade. If your business wanted to export products, you had to factor in not just the cost of transportation, but the cost of handling at both ends. And there was no guarantee it would arrive in good condition. This was not a small-scale issue. It affected almost every product that crossed the ocean: food, machinery, clothing, construction materials. And because ships took so long to load and unload, they spent more time sitting still than actually moving goods. The system worked, barely, but it was holding back global trade, and almost everyone knew it. What no one had figured out yet was how to fix it, until one truck driver came up with a different approach. Meet Malcolm McLean, a truck driver from North Carolina. In the 1930s, he bought a second-hand truck and began hauling goods, eventually expanding his business into McLean Trucking Company, one of the largest trucking fleets in the U.S. at the time. In 1937, he was waiting at a New Jersey port while workers unloaded his truck, one crate at a time. It was slow, inefficient, and frustrating, and that's when he started asking questions. Why unload the truck at all? Why not just move the entire trailer onto the ship? That question stayed with him for years. By the 1950s, McLean had grown his trucking company into one of the largest in the country, but he was still thinking about that same idea. In 1955, he sold his business for $25 million and bought a small shipping company called Pan Atlantic. His plan was not to improve the existing system. He wanted to replace it. At first, he considered lifting full truck trailers onto ships. But trailers have wheels, axles, and a lot of empty space. They're not designed for stacking, so instead McLean focused on just the cargo box. No wheels, no chassis. A uniform, sealed metal container that could be lifted directly from a truck to a ship or a train without opening it. McLean partnered with engineer Keith Tantlinger to design not just the container itself, but the locking mechanisms that would allow them to be stacked securely. These twist locks, built into the corners of each box, made it possible to pile containers on ships without fear of them shifting during storms. The first real test came on April 26, 1956. McLean's converted World War II T2 oil tanker, the Ideal X, left Newark, New Jersey, carrying 58 containers. 5 days later, it arrived in Houston. Trucks were already waiting to pick up the containers and drive them straight to their destinations. No unloading, no repacking, no delays. It worked, and people started paying attention. McLean believed that if the entire logistics chain could be standardized, from the dimensions of the container to the locks that held them in place, it could completely transform global commerce. He didn't just see containers as boxes, he saw them as the missing piece in a much larger system. But the idea was bigger than just one successful trip. shipping companies were skeptical. Many had spent decades building fleets, port infrastructure, and labor systems around traditional break-bulk cargo. A sudden shift to containers meant scrapping a lot of that and investing heavily in new equipment. And then there were the dock workers. For generations, unloading ships had provided reliable, well-paid work in port cities. But with containers, a job that once required dozens of men could now be handled by a crane operator and a small crew. Unions understood what was coming. In some cases, they outright refused to handle containers. Strikes broke out in major ports across the US and Europe. A longshoreman in New York reportedly said, "If they bring in that box, I'm out of a job." They were not wrong. Containerization would eventually reduce the number of dock workers in some ports by as much as 90%. Port authorities were also hesitant. Most existing ports weren't built for container ships. They lacked space, heavy-duty pavement, and the giant cranes needed to move the boxes efficiently. Retrofitting ports was expensive. Some just couldn't do it at all. Now there was another problem: standardization. By the early 1960s, other companies had started experimenting with their own container systems. But not everyone was using the same dimensions or locking mechanisms. Without standard sizes, containers from one company couldn't easily be transferred to another ship or handled at other ports. McLean could have protected his designs. Instead, he did the opposite. He made his patents available for free. That move helped push the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, to adopt a global standard. The standard 20 and 40-foot containers, or TEU and FEU, that we see today all trace back to those early designs. Once that happened, the pace changed. In 1966, the first full container service crossed the Atlantic. By 1967, the U.S. military was using containers to supply its operations in Vietnam. And as major ports in Asia and Europe upgraded their facilities, more companies realized this wasn't just a shipping method, it was the future. Still, it had taken more than a decade to get from one experimental voyage to global acceptance. Change didn't come quickly, but it came. From the outside, it's just a box, but the details matter. The standard container is 8 feet wide, 8.5 feet tall, and either 20 or 40 feet long. Those dimensions were not random. They were chosen to fit neatly on rail cars, truck trailers, and inside ship holds. The idea was to create one box that could move across all modes of transport without ever being unpacked. That's what made it efficient. It also had to be strong. Containers are built from Corten steel, which resists rust and holds up to harsh ocean conditions. Each box has corner castings, thick metal fittings that allow cranes to latch on and lift them with precision. These same corners also let containers lock together when stacked, using a device called a twist lock. Without that feature, stacking them 6 or 7 high on a moving ship would be impossible. The floors are made from heavy-duty plywood or bamboo layered over steel crossbars, strong enough to support several tons of cargo. The doors are watertight, sealed with rubber gaskets, and secured with locking rods that can handle rough seas and long journeys. What mattered most was consistency. Every container, regardless of where it's made, has to meet the same basic standards. That allows ports to use the same cranes, trains to use the same flatbeds, and ships to load and unload faster with fewer adjustments. This uniformity didn't just save time, it changed how ships were built. Old cargo ships had open holds and cranes mounted on deck. Container ships don't need those. Instead, they use a cellular design, metal guide rails below deck that help containers slide into place like books on a shelf. Above deck, containers are stacked and locked tightly. As the system improved, the ships got bigger. The Ideal X carried 58 containers. Today, the largest vessels carry more than 20,000. It also made shipping safer. Since cargo stays sealed until it reaches its destination, there's less chance of damage or theft. It's harder to tamper with a locked steel box than a wooden crate or loose bundle. And because every container is tracked, shipped, and transferred as a unit, the entire process became faster, cheaper, and more reliable. That's what made it work. It wasn't about creating something flashy. It was about making sure that every container, on every truck, every train, and every ship, worked exactly the same way. Once containers became standardized, the effects were immediate and wide-reaching. Shipping costs dropped sharply. This made international trade much more affordable. Suddenly, it was worth shipping everyday items. Products that once had to be made close to where they were sold could now be manufactured wherever labor was cheaper or materials were easier to source. Trade saw a substantial growth. Between 1970 and 2010, the volume of global container trade grew by more than tenfold, and most of that was carried in standardized steel boxes. Countries like China, South Korea, and Vietnam became manufacturing centers. They built ports, factories, and logistics networks that relied on container shipping to reach markets in Europe and North America. For many developing countries, containers provided a way into the global economy. Consumers benefited too. Products became cheaper and more available. Goods that once felt exclusive to certain regions, like electronics from Japan or textiles from India, started appearing in stores around the world. Retailers changed how they operated. Companies like Walmart and IKEA based their entire supply chains around low-cost, high-volume container transport. They could order in bulk, ship globally, and keep shelves stocked year-round. The same was true for parts and raw materials. A factory in Germany could assemble cars using engines from Japan, steel from South Korea, and electronics from Taiwan, all delivered on a schedule by containers. Without containers, this kind of global supply chain would have been too slow, too risky, or too expensive. Even inland cities, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest port, felt the impact. Containers moved by rail brought goods directly into the heart of countries. Distribution centers popped up near highways and rail hubs, supporting jobs in logistics, warehousing, and transport. One shipping innovation didn't just affect ports, it helped drive globalization. And for better or worse, it made the world feel smaller. But while some cities lost port jobs, others gained something new. Los Angeles, Shanghai, Singapore, Dubai all became global trade hubs because they built infrastructure for containers early. These ports attracted manufacturers, shipping companies, and logistics firms. They became central to how goods flowed around the world. The container system works. It's reliable, standardized, and still expanding. But it's also under pressure to change. Ports are getting busier, ships are getting larger, and the demand for faster, more efficient logistics continues to grow. Automation is already part of that response. In Rotterdam, Shanghai, and Los Angeles, ports are now using remote-controlled cranes, autonomous vehicles, and automated stacking systems to move containers with minimal human input. Some terminals operate around the clock without ever switching on floodlights because machines don't need them. That improves speed and reduces labor costs, but it also raises new questions about jobs, access, and who benefits from the technology. The containers themselves are also getting smarter. Some now come equipped with sensors and GPS trackers. These devices monitor temperature, humidity, shock, and location in real time. That's especially useful for sensitive cargo like food, medicine, or electronics. If a container is damaged, opened unexpectedly, or delayed, the system alerts operators immediately. It's a step toward a more transparent supply chain, where every container can be tracked, analyzed, and optimized. And while the core design of the container hasn't changed much in decades, some companies are now testing lighter materials, collapsible versions for empty returns, and modular containers that can be split or combined depending on the cargo. But the basic principle remains the same. Whether it's lifted by a crane or guided by AI sent across the ocean, or tracked in the cloud, it's still a steel box moving goods from point A to point B. And that simple idea still works. And it worked because someone looked at a slow, expensive process and asked a better question. That question, simple as it was, led to a global shift in how we move almost everything. Today, over 20 million containers are moving across oceans, highways, and rail networks. They carry nearly everything we buy, use, and depend on. And despite all the advances in global trade, the basic container has barely changed. It didn't need to. That plain steel box still does exactly what it was designed to do: efficiently move goods anywhere in the world. And it's still doing it. So here's a question for you. What's another system that seems simple on the surface, but completely changes how the world works? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. See you soon in our next video.